Well, I'm showing 4 minutes past, and I feel like folks have gathered, and let's get things started this morning. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Samvera Connect 2021. We're really happy that you're joining us today. I will be your host today. My name is Kevin Kochansky. I am client liaison at Notch 8, and I'm really grateful to be part of this Connect 2021 planning committee. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started, and I'll say morning because I'm on the West Coast in California, so I'm stuck in my habits. Before we get started this morning, please note that this webinar has live closed captioning available, so simply click on the closed captioning button at the bottom of the Zoom window. This conference is being recorded. We'll have videos available on the Semvera YouTube channel, and slides will be made available in the Semvera community repository. Attendees will receive links to both in the days after the event. We'll have Q&A function for your questions. We have a Connect Slack channel for conversation. I think we went with the convention of if you are a panelist, you may not have access to the chat. That may have changed today, but if so, we'll keep an eye on the Connect channel and Slack as well, and just do question : and I will see those and try to bring those questions to the talks. If you need access to Semvera Slack workspace, there's a link on Sched where you can request access. Today's sessions will run for 3.5 hours, and we'll have 2 10-minute breaks. In the interest of maintaining a safe and supportive environment for all Semverans participating in today's events, we'll read the Code of Conduct and the Anti-Harassment Policy at the start of each day as a gentle reminder of how we work together and we care for one another. Semvera's Code of Conduct lays out our shared expectations for respectful communication. The Semvera community is dedicated to providing a welcoming and positive experience for all its members, whether they're at a formal gathering, in a social setting, or taking part of activities online. The Semvera community welcomes participation from people all over the world, and these community members bring with them a wide variety of professional, personal, and social backgrounds. Whatever these may be, we treat colleagues with dignity and respect. Community members communicate primarily in English, though for many of them, this is not their native language. We therefore strive to express ourselves simply and remember that unnecessary use of jargon and slang will be a barrier to understanding for many of our colleagues. We are sensitive to the fact that the international nature of the community means that we span many different social norms around language and behavior, and we strive to conduct ourselves online and in person in ways that are unlikely to cause offense. Samvera conversations are often information-rich and intended to generate discussion and debate. We discuss ideas from a standpoint of mutual respect and reasoned argument. The companion piece to our Code of Conduct is Samvera's Anti-Harassment Policy. It reads as follows. The Samvera community does not tolerate harassment in any form. Sexual or discriminatory language and imagery is not appropriate for any event venue, including talks or any community channel, such as Slack-based chat rooms or mailing lists. Harassment includes offensive verbal comments related to sex, gender, ethnicity, nationality, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, age, race, or religion. Sexual or discriminatory images in public spaces. Deliberate intimidation, stalking, harassing photography or recording, sustained disruption of talks or other events, inappropriate physical content, and unwelcome sexual attention. Participants asked to stop any harassing behavior are expected to comply immediately. We expect participants to follow the Code of Conduct and Anti-Harassment Policy at all meeting venues, meeting-related social events, community gatherings, and online communication channels. Participants violating the Code of Conduct or Anti-Harassment Policy may be sanctioned or expelled at the discretion of the Incident Response Team in accordance with the Samvera Code of Conduct Incident Response Manual. You get a link to these 2 written policies at any time by either going to the channel description at the top of the Connect Slack channel, or by typing the phrase get COC, that's GET space COC, into any channel in Samvera Slack. That link will come right up. And on this slide, you'll see a list of today's helpers and a way to reach them. If you're new to the community, there's probably a lot going on that may seem unfamiliar or unclear. It's okay to feel a little lost and out of place. Most of us did at first. Guilty. Many of us have found the best way to get over our initial discomfort is to jump in and start asking questions or volunteering to help. We're an agile community working to make things better as we go, and that means everybody's qualified to help. What about imposter syndrome? There are no imposters here. Most of all, we want everyone to have fun, learn new things, and move Semvera forward. Now, to start our day, I am going to hand things over to our first presenter and welcome Mark Bussey. And we're about 1 minute early, so feel free to do a little bit of schmoozing to make sure your audience is gathered. I'll stop sharing and you can share your slides.
Hi, everybody. Kevin, can you hear me okay?
Sounds great, Mark.
I'll also have to move Zoom out of the way. All right. All right. How do I figure out if I'm doing the right optimizations? Does everybody see my screen?
Yes, Mark.
All right. Some of my other DCE team members, Norm and Rachel, might have shown folks using Miro for their presentations. And as part of my schmoozing, I'll say that I'm going to do the same thing, and I'll be moving around a little bit. It let me put some information in that's pretty information dense, and I can zoom into it later. Also, it was just a great way for me to brainstorm the presentation. So there'll be a little moving around. I'm going to do that right now. So my talk today is about things that we've been learning about Hyrax and IIIF and Cantaloupe and all the interactions in between. And more meta, it's about how do I figure out which optimizations to do and where to spend my time. So as always, great wisdom from XKCD. I actually go back to their table about how much time should I spend optimizing things a lot of the time to remind myself that, you know, sometimes the juice isn't worth the squeeze. And then I happen to find the cartoon on the right here that, you know, sometimes our best laid plans, and you'll see in a moment, even my best laid plans for this talk, sometimes go off the rails, and how do we keep ourselves on the rails? So that's sort of the meta content of this talk, in addition to talking about IIIF and Hyrax. So, you know, you can spend a lot of time optimizing things, or a lot of time doing what you think are going to be optimizations. And so one of the questions in our work was, how do we figure out if we're doing the right optimizations, and is our time paying off? So in our particular use case, ours was that we have this new repository up. We've been building this and rebuilding this and making this great new shiny thing. And it's here, and I go look for something. Move you all out of the way for a second. And I have an image, and because I've been prepping my talk, it's not going to be as awful as it once was. But, you know, here's my great new book. It's a thing that we have in the office that we kind of love. And I cut this page, and it took forever to load. And as my colleague Max pointed out, you know, that's going to be one of the first things people experience, and that's going to be kind of painful. So before we launch into let's do technical work, it made sense to sort of stop and think about where are our bottlenecks, what's going to happen. So for the course of this talk, I do want to add or lay out a few sort of what the bumpers are on what we're looking at here. This is currently a Hyrax 2.9.6 based application that started its life out way back when in Hyrax 1. So it's been upgraded over and over. So there may be artifacts and legacy things to our configuration that got carried forward that wouldn't happen in a newly generated Hyrax 3 application. We're using the default install of Cantaloupe 5. And almost definitely your mileage is going to vary, but I think the process that I walk through works for not just images, but a lot of technical and performance issues. So hopefully the process, it overall is useful, and the particular data I think actually does sort of tend to relatively be true for a lot of different environments that we've looked at, but understand that this is all looking at a very specific environment. So that thing was going slow. Let's take a look at it and figure out what's going on. So the first thing in trying to understand is it occurred to me that there's a pretty snazzy network inspector built into Safari and Chrome. And if I just go to my page and I open up the network inspector and I start loading things, I can kind of see what's going on in real time. And the key things to know on this picture is time flows from left to right. Green is wait times and blue is load times. So I can zoom into a little bit of this and I'll see that there's a page load. This turns out to be the same ID as my work ID. So this is the basic work page load. And gosh, that's a really long green bar. Green, 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 waiting, 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 waiting. Oh, look, there's a little blip of blue content. So it takes Hyrax quite a while to pull together all the metadata and all the information to build this entire page. That includes the labels and fields and descriptions, that includes the thumbnails, that includes other things. In fact, on the bottom of this page, there's a set of thumbnails here in Universal Viewer, and there's a different set of thumbnails here in the file attachments or the items list. I'm going to explicitly not talk about these today. These are thumbnails that are generated and stored as derivatives elsewhere. Turns out they're pretty zippy, and they're going to fly right by as I look through my network traffic. So just to call out something that you may notice or think about. So what I'm really interested in and what was really slow to begin with was the stuff that's happening in this black box. And in some ways, Universal Viewer is a black box to us. So my page load takes some time, but that happens. There's my little thumbnails. They're all pretty, they've got some latency. Here's a bunch of scripts and fonts and other things. I can see that by looking at the type list here in my inspector. Keeping looking long, it's waiting, it's processing. Here's some more stuff. Wait, here's something that might be interesting, manifest. If I know anything about IIIF, I know that there's a thing called a manifest that handles the organization of everything. And lo and behold, that manifest time, waiting. If you can see here, here's 200 milliseconds and here's, or 2000 milliseconds and here's 3000 milliseconds. That green line is almost a full second long, kind of a long time. And then I don't know if the color is showing through, but the blue again is the actual content download. So there's almost a second long to wait for just a flash of content to download. That's something we might want to look at later. And then, there's all these default things going on. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But again, a lot of them have pretty long wait times. There's a there's our biggest download we've seen, 33K. Everything else is in the 2 and 3K. Wait. And sort of over here is when finally everything is loaded. So I can just use this view to sort of figure out where are the big green bars and what are those things. And again, the three biggest green bars were over here. The initial page load with all the metadata and all the things. Not going to worry about that today because that's not really the IIIF service. Then there's the manifest. We'll talk more about that. And then there is the files themselves, or the thumbnails themselves. So, like I said, we're not going to look at the work itself. We are going to look at the manifest, and we're going to look at the little images called default.jpg. So what did we see? The item view had a pretty long delay, not too much actual content. I didn't pay much attention to it, but there's a CSS style sheet and some application JavaScript that loads. Those are some of the bigger things that load, but the delay is pretty small. Some more JavaScript. Then finally, that IIIF manifest, that has a long delay, not much payload, some more JavaScript, and then a bunch of images called default.jpg. If I go, and actually we just looked at a multi-image work, so I'll talk about multi versus single for a minute. The main difference, to cut to the chase, is that the manifest on a multi-image work tends to take much longer to load and generate than on single image works. And then the last thing is, if I zoom, the first time I go to things, there might be a very long delay as those derivatives and zoom fragments are created. But Cantaloupe or Riff, if I'm using that, typically are only sending 512 by 512 pixel tiles over me. So the payload is really tiny on most of those things when I pan and zoom and do other kinds of information, other kinds of transformations. So I want to quickly look at Zion. So as I zoom this in, what Universal Viewer is doing is transferring over blocks 512 pixels at a time, or 512 in chunks of 512 by 512. I'm getting this same kind of network traffic, except I'm getting a bunch of chunks. Those look like these links here are what are actually being called. Those are getting set up in an image tile. So the first, the ×1 zoom is my 1 here. Then I get 2 tiles that are half that size for my next level of zoom in. Then for the next level of zoom in, I get 6 more tiles because my tiles are square, but my viewport is rectangular. So I just need enough tiles to cover my viewport. The key thing to know there is that when I zoom, and when the zoom control is in the wrong place, I can't get to what I need to. When I zoom in and out, I get a lot of these tiles. And so that can pretty negatively impact my performance. So in thinking about all of this, sort of what's going on and what do I really want to be testing for? Loading the main page, not going to worry about. Loading the small images for the preview or for the items page, those thumbnails, that's not fast, we're not going to worry. The manifest, that took a long time. All of those default.jpegs, particularly when my cache wasn't warm, those took a long time. So, and then also people are likely to page through things when I have multi-pages work. That works, I might go through, zoom. No, not there. I might scroll through this. I might page this way. So I can go through and look at all that and say, what might I want to do? Where are there bottlenecks? What might I want to change? I came up with a series of things I might want to change here. whether I use Riff or Cantaloupe, if I want to try a bigger server, if I want to do caching, if I want to try and pre-optimize the images. And having done that, I can start thinking about, well, what am I really checking for? So time to load the manifests for single or multiple works, time for the thumbnails, time to zoom. I can go take all of those things, and again, using sort of the network viewer that I was just, traffic viewer that I was just showing, I can take and sort of create a schema for those things, and I can use a tool like JMeter to create myself a test plan to sort of emulate what I might be doing as a user. So I've set up JMeter here. I've set up what does it look like to look up a single image work. I load the manifest. It loads a couple different sizes of images. I can look at zooming. Zooming gives me the preview and then a bunch of tiles. And then I can look at a multi-page work and I can sort of bring up the initial work and then see what it builds up in the content pane. So I can capture those requests and replay them. I have a couple players here that basically emulate that I have 3 users starting 1 minute apart or 1 second apart, trying these 5 times so that I sort of average out my test over time. I can set this up. This lets me generate a report something like this. It goes out and does all that network traffic and all those requests multiple times. So you can see I'm getting 5, 7, 3, 8 samples. It'll eventually be up to 15 for each. That gives me an average over all of these. I can then look at that and sort of start thinking about what do my aggregate times look like, what are good and bad. Talked about sort of where do I want to go? Well, I want to start with the benchmark of what's my current performance, what's my baseline bad performance look like? That's my V1. V2, you can always throw money at a problem. So what if I just use twice as large a server? That's always a good thing to test. V3, what's my caching doing for me? And particularly, it turns out there's a setting to turn on caching of that manifest. What does that do? Might it look like if I run Cantaloupe instead of Riff? What might it look like if I turn caching on in Cantaloupe? Because it turns out that the Cantaloupe default install does not turn caching on. And then, wow, wouldn't it be neat if I could pre-optimize these images for display and show p-tips? So I captured and created that test, did my benchmarking on a basic system. So it's we run our servers on Amazon. I'm using a T3A extra large. That's, I think, 8 CPUs and 32 gig or something like that. We're running Hyrax 2, Riff, no caching. What are my key insights from the basic testing? One is that UV makes lots of requests for lots of image fragments and lots of tiles. 2 is that the uncached images down over here, if I look at my max time for a fave icon, there's a 6-second load time, there's a 4-second load time, there's a 3-second, there's a 2, there's a 1. So that first hit when nothing is in the cache, it can be pretty awful. On the flip side, once things are warmed up in the cache, my minimum time for those requests are about 62 milliseconds. That's pretty fine. The average bytes transferred, again, all of these things are all relatively small. The biggest thing here is actually the multi-page manifest for my 250-page book. So what if I just throw money at this problem? And I am going to run out of time shortly, so I am going to jump to the chase in a minute. Money can help me a little bit, but it turns out that Amazon charges me twice as much for the next size server up. And if I look at the numbers, I only get about a 25% bump. So I can pay twice as much money to get a 25% performance improvement. If I don't have much time to do anything else, that's a good solution. but if not, then that's not great. I have posted these slides. I'm sorry I took so long in the setup, but I'm going to jump down to the findings. So for manifests, the easy thing is to buy a bigger server. It's also easy to turn on caching. You might want to pre-cache your manifest so that the first person coming to a thing doesn't get the horrible hit. And you might, if you have special requirements, you might want to create kind of a custom manifest store. That's pretty advanced. For images themselves, again, buying a bigger server will help some, but not as much as the dollars you have to spend for it. Enable caching, you get that free sort of with Riff. You have to turn that on with Cantaloupe. That helps a lot. You can use Cantaloupe as an external server. That does give you about a 20% bump on Riff. You can move your images out of Fedora and onto a disk store somewhere. That again gives you a bump. And in those use cases, I sort of summarized when you might want to do those things. So basically, if you have a workflow that already puts things on disk somewhere and that you have a known ID schema, setting up Cantaloupe to just use those is a great solution since you already have them. If you want to be able to tune your image performance, frankly, running something like Cantaloupe is helpful because you can configure that, its memory, its caching, its other things, a lot more detailed than you can for the particular kinds of images you have than you can for Riff. So I will stop there since I'm running out of time. I do have these posted to the Samvera community repo. There's some resources that I used in preparing the test. And if you want to see the detailed numbers or if you have any questions about the numbers themselves, feel free to reach out to me in the Connect channel or in Slack. I think that's it.
Thanks, Mark. I did not see any questions come through on Connect or on the Zoom panel. If anybody had any questions, we do have a couple minutes. All right. Well, Mark invited folks to follow up with him on Slack. So if you wake up in the middle of the night with any questions. Oh, here we go. Dal wants to ask, is Cantaloupe the only image server that you tested?
Cantaloupe's the one that we use most commonly. My guess is that looking at IIP or one of the others probably shows you similar sorts of things. I think the main advantage of having so yes, Cantaloupe is the only one we tested. And the main issue is that having an offboard image server lets you tune and configure that server separately from your web application, which is sometimes helpful.
Thanks, Mark. How about, did you end up turning on HTTP2?
So we don't in Cantaloupe because we handle all of that at a higher layer. Cantaloupe is a very basic HTTP configuration.
Where do you keep the results of your performance testing, and how do you keep that organized?
So again, the goal was to make quick decisions about what to do, and you'll see actually that my PTIF derivatives was kind of a fail test. It really is more of, it's not about saving and being able to look back. It's being able to save that test script is super useful so that I can use that in the future. So we've often just taken that's a little bit of JSON that can get saved into your application repo. So we often save that JMeter test script somewhere in the repo itself of the project that we're working on. The test results are in some ways, to my mind, ephemeral. They're helping us decide, are we putting our efforts in the right direction? They are in this presentation though.
Thanks. One more question. What were the source images, JP2 pyramid TIFF?
So again, that was the part that I didn't quite show, but if you go look at the results, that was where my fail was. So what we actually have in place is a derivative chain that will create those using ImageMagick from whatever we ingest into the repository. But wiring those up for Cantaloupe to find those on disk was a piece that was a little more fragile and complicated than I was too in the time getting ready for the talk.
All right. Well, thank you for your questions, and thank you, Mark. Next up, we are going to have a final draft, a tour of the new Hyrax analytics features. So I'm happy to turn it over to Franny Gady and Margaret Mellinger and my amazing colleagues at Notch8, April Rieger and Jeezy, aka Sarah Garachi. So I think you should be able to take screen share, whoever is kicking things off.
Fantastic. And do we have all of our compatriots here?
I'm here.
April confirmed that she got a link, so I'll just make sure that she joins because I don't see her on the list of panelists right now.
All righty.
And
How's everybody doing?
I'm working on sharing my screen.
All
So
right.
yeah, just
Well, we can take a minute and do that.
yeah.
It has stopped raining for the moment. It spent most of the night doing so because it's Oregon and it's fall. And that's what it does here.
Okay.
Fabulous.
Presenter mode. How's that look?
It's going.
Okay,
Yay.
excellent.
There we go.
All right, so let's get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Margaret Mellinger, and I'm at Oregon State University, and I'm one of the PIs on this project, co-PI. And we are going to be talking about a project that we had with IMLS to create some analytics features for Hyrax. And I want to let everyone else on the panel presenters introduce themselves. So let's start with Franny and go to Sarah and April after that.
All right. Thank you, Margaret. I'm Franny Gady. I'm the Director of Digital Scholarship Services at the University of Oregon and co-PI with Margaret on the IMLS grant that helped create this project. And before that, one of the things that kind of helped germinate this idea, I worked at Butler University. I see a few of my former colleagues from Palmy here today and was very interested in the gap analysis from Haiku. And one of the major things that was on there was analytics. And so that kind of helped bring up the idea of wanting to work on this project. And so that's kind of where my interest in working on this came from. And I will pass it over to Sarah.
Hey everyone, my name is Sarah Garachi, better known as Jeezy. I am a software developer at Notch8, and I was super excited to work on the analytics project.
And I'm hoping April is not having technical difficulties.
April has joined the call, but I'm understanding that she's having a hard time connecting to audio at the moment.
Oh no.
So I guess we can mostly say that that April has been working on some of the web design and accessibility features within this project and working as part of the Notch8 team. So given the introductions, I guess we just need to go forward. We want to express our gratitude to the IMLS for a national leadership grant that supported this work. And much of the work was actually completed by Notch8. So we want to also, I'm in trouble, thanking the Notch8 team, and it was a little bit bigger than the people on the call today, and we won't read all the names out, but we want to thank everybody at Notch8 for being wonderful to work with and for working with us on this project. So to get started, Obviously, analytics is built on a data source. And while the majority of academic libraries use Google Analytics as a data source, there's an increasing concern about protecting the privacy of library users. So questions arise about the data that Google collects, how long they store it, how administrators can set up Google Analytics to best protect user privacy, and other issues. And an alternative to Google Analytics that seems to be less evil than Google at the time is Matomo, which offers a lot of the same features as Google Analytics, but the data it collects belongs only to the institution that is running it. So because of this growing concern on privacy and controlling user data, one of the basic requirements of this grant was to give Hyrax adopters a choice between the familiar Google Analytics and Matomo, which they might want to move to because it can be locally hosted. It has sort of a default do not track setting, and it gives administrators more control over how long data is kept. And Sarah worked on this extensively, so we wanted to have her talk about some of the features and how she approached the separation of those two data sources.
So the super cool thing is you can choose between either Analytics or Matomo, and you'll find that they work exactly the same in the app. So it doesn't matter which one you choose. They're both integrated directly into the new Hyrax dashboard. And then you can still log into your accounts as normal. So you can still go to googleanalytics.com and log into your account and access all the features as you normally would. Same for Matomo. One thing that I really like about Matomo is that you can self-host it. So your data stays within your organization. It's not getting sent off to somebody else's servers, which is really nice. But other than that, I think you'll find them to be very similar. I think Matomo has a little bit easier to use interface, but Google probably still has a little bit more powerful reporting features. But as far as the integration into Hyrax, they're both exactly the same.
Okay. Oops, I'm sorry, I went forward too fast there.
I think we're one back.
Here we go. Thanks.
All
Hi,
right.
April.
Hi, everybody.
Yay. Hi. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So one of the things that so I wanted to start with on the front end. And so when we're talking front end here, this isn't front end design so much as like what public users are going to see here. And so this is kind of sprucing up a few things that were already in place and kind of taking some of the lovely design that you're going to see from on the dashboard side and bringing that for public users to see. And so this is some of the storytelling that we wanted to be able to do, you know, depending on kind of what model of repository you might be following, whether it's a self-submission sort of thing or a, you know, we're going to take your stuff and deposit it for you, whether it's an institutional repository or a cultural repository. So there might be, you know, any number of use cases, whether, you know, whether this is faculty who are going to use this kind of data for promotion and tenure and they want to check it themselves, or they might have a login where they'd be able to take advantage of some of the things that we're going to look at on the back end. So this might be something that they want to look at on the front end here. You know, this might also be something that an administrator might check in on themselves, or, you know, you might provide them a report from the back end here. So, you know, just kind of providing this here on the front end for anybody to be able to check in on and kind of adding a little bit of the flair that you will see on the back end here. I don't know, April, if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, so this was already pre-existing in place, and a part of the work that we did was just connecting it up to the analytics providers. So we're really excited that we were able to get that contributed back hopefully soon. But I can go ahead and start talking about the dashboard next.
All right.
Part of this work was brought up with the Hyrax analytic working group, and they had created the initial wireframes for this work. And one of the things that they wanted to incorporate in this design was a calendar widget. So we started to develop the calendar, each graph having its own calendar widget, but we initially thought that that would be a great user experience. When we were playing with the actual data though, we noticed that it was a little confusing and clunky for the user experience, and decided to just use one calendar widget for the entire dashboard. So when we update that calendar widget, it updates the dates for all of the graphs on that page. So that was pretty exciting to include.
And up at the top there where it says customized graph reports, that'll update to show you what dates your report going down is actually showing. So that's nice as well. All right. And we can go on to the next slide now. All right. This has some good information on it here. April, do you want to start us off?
Sure. All right. So this was part of the user activity graph that was previously on Hyrax. We also had the user summary. I'm not sure if well, you guys are probably all familiar with Hyrax and how the user summary displays in the main block above the fold on the dashboard. We decided to take better use of the space and include that within the user activity graph, creating kind of like an easier, much more meaningful experience so that we can get a high overview of the graph and the user activity. We also needed to add some usability cases. We needed to include a larger text for the graph labels. We had to apply better label spacing. We had to ensure that the ARIA labels were text-based for screen readers, and including a colorblind safe array of colors for all of the graphs to utilize. And that's all I have to include for this beautiful graph.
And on Hover, you can see in the screenshot here that I captured this on a particular day that it breaks down some of the things that you might see in a Google Analytics or Matoma report without having to actually leave the site there. And so we opted here for stacked bar graphs as well, rather than say pie charts or something along those lines, as being a lot easier to parse. So that was something that we kind of decided fairly early on in the process, as I am not a big fan of pie charts, and was like, hey, can we find something else to display this data here? So, all right. So I think that was it for our user summary here. And so on the other side of kind of user data, one of the other things that we knew was also really important was repository growth over time too. So we want to know how often our materials are being accessed, but we also kind of want to know how much stuff is in there as well, and at what rate things are growing. And so the two items that we're tracking here are number of works and number of collections over time. And so this is also for that date picker. So that defaults to 1 month, as you can see here. Well, actually, we have a longer date here. So this is, I think, dating back to, I think, the start of the staging server to when we picked it. But it defaults to a single month. I think I wanted to get a larger spread of time so we could see, oh, hey, here's when we added all of these items. So we actually had a little bump up here, but I think that this is an item that was particularly important to repository managers to kind of demonstrate, like, hey, look at how well we're doing at adding new items into our repository. And so here we've got blue is collections and black is number of works. And so this can kind of show periods of particular growth, large number of works. Let's say we had, kind of a big batch ingest that was maybe associated with a new collection, or, hey, we had a really good recruiting period associated with an institutional repository. Again, with the idea of these are all meant to be storytelling mechanisms. And April, I don't know if there was anything that you wanted to add along though. And again, with hover as well. So being able to kind of hover over each of those points to get more information.
Sorry about the slides flashing around there. My mouse was a little unhappy, I guess.
I know every time like I hit like your mouse wheel or something like that, and it's like, oh, we're going to play roulette with the slides here. Let's see which one we land on.
Yeah.
All right.
Are we ready for the next slide, or do you want to
I
see?
think we're ready.
The way I was doing it before.
All right. And so this is a little bit more on the metadata side of things, but being able to break down our repository content by metadata here. And so the three pieces of metadata that we picked out here were visibility, work types, and resource types, and kind of recognizing that people use work types and resource types a little bit differently. I know in Oregon Digital, we use work types the way that resource types are being used here, but to be able to understand let's say an institutional repository where you might have some things that are public, some things that are IP restricted, and in work types that you might, or in resource types, right? You might have images and documents and how those things break down to understand kind of what is the composition of a given repository. Also recognizing that at many places, you may not have a divide between an institutional and a cultural heritage repository, that you have one repository to rule them all and one to bind them, right? Also, this used to be one graph, kind of more along the lines of the bigger graph that we looked at earlier with the stacked bar charts. And we ended up splitting this into three to kind of better represent this data here. April, I wasn't sure if there's anything we wanted to add on.
We just added that new array of colors to display on these graphs. That's probably the only thing to add. You did a wonderful job, Brandy.
Right. And collections. So added this tabbed box of different kinds of collections here. So we didn't have a ton on the staging server here, but I know in Oregon Digital, for example, we have many collections, and recognizing that there may be some that you would like to keep an eye on. Oh.
Sorry.
That's okay. And so introducing kind of these pinned collections that you can kind of add and keep up at the top. So like your flagged email, for example, and then also having a tab for just pinned collections as well. So I know, for example, we have some that were part of a donor initiative. And so those might be some that, hey, we're going to need to provide regular updates on this. So let's go ahead and pin those so we can easily get to them. And this is providing a list of how many works are associated with those. So, hey, we'd like to have, an update on the number of works and files that are associated. All right. So April, did you want to talk about the reports?
Actually, I think that was Sarah's going to be talking about.
All right.
Reports. Okay, so we did not do anything to the statistics link. That's left unchanged. Instead, we grouped everything into the analytics tab, which is going to be in your dashboard. When you click that drop down, you can choose from either a collections report or a works report. Do you want to switch the screen, the slide there, so we can look at the next report? There we go, collections report. So we have this broken down into three tabs: a summary, a kind of an overall summary of the views of works and the downloads of works, as well as top collections. And then if you click on the monthly tab, it gets broken down on a per month, month-by-month basis for the last 12 months. Or you can click on the custom range tab and set a date and then get the same data for the custom range. You can also export all of the numbers with the export link. And I believe that's about it for the collections report.
Yeah, Yeah, and the number of collections, you'll see the top 10 collections and the information about that. And that is also paginated, so you can kind of click through and see all of your collections and the data about it. And then this is where you click through into a collection report and see kind of the data about that specific collection. And that collection report has basically the same information. So here's the summary about it. There's a monthly breakdown, and then you can also set a custom range and get that information. And then Margaret, I think if you click through these slides, you'll also see what the monthly report looks like and the custom range looks like. So here's the monthly breakdown, and then that'll just show the last 12 months. And you can see up at the top here, it also says this repository contains 3 collections, which collectively had 18 page views and 3 downloads. And then that'll just update over time there. And then the custom range will show on the next slide. There we go. And then basically the works reports work in exactly the same way with the and if we want to go to the next slide, we can just take a look at that. Oh. And then all of these can be exported to CSV. So there's a little export button kind of down at the bottom top. I think it's in one of the slide shots there, but all of these reports are able to be screenshot or exported, and also with the idea that many of the graphs and tables can also be screenshotted and included in reports looking all nice and pretty. And here's the works report. Yes. So likewise with pagination, it'll show the top 10 works, and you can click through for multiple pages, and you can also click into an individual work to get more data about it. There's the export button.
I'm going to chime in real quick here and mention that we made the decision to include the actual ID of your work in the reports because what's being sent back to the analytics provider, as in Google or Matomo, is actually that ID. So when you go to your Matomo dashboard or your Google account, the data there is not super useful because you're just going to see these random string of numbers and letters. But if you just copy and paste that ID, and you can do searches and stuff with that, or use that in queries directly in analytics, you'll be able to get a lot more useful information.
And one of the things that I really noticed as an institutional repository manager is kind of differentiating between views and downloads. And so that was another thing that I really appreciated about this, was kind of breaking that out and making that easier to distinguish. All right. And all right. And one thing you might have seen, that the title of this presentation changed from when you might have clicked, yes, I want to attend this presentation, to when we started here. And one of the very exciting things is that this will be hopefully coming soon to a Hyrax release candidate near you. Initially, we were kind of thinking that this might be a gem, but now it will be integrated into Hyrax. So that is something we're very excited about and extremely grateful to our Not8 partners. Absolutely none of this would have happened without our amazing friends at Not8. So thank you so, so much. And I am so sorry we did not leave nearly enough time for questions, but we would be delighted to take questions in Slack. And I think we have time for maybe one.
I think we're running about 10 minutes ahead of schedule. So not to get you off the hook, Franny, but
yes, fabulous. All right.
I learned if you wait a minute, questions appear. So I will just say selfishly,
it takes time to enter, to type questions. So
I will say from the Not8 side that Franny and Margaret have been a real joy to work with on this project. And I also thank Crystal Richardson and April Rieger and Sarah Garachi and Braden Justice and everybody else from my team that helped work with this. It was a lot of fun. Jonathan, yes. So we've got, sorry if I missed this, but I'm curious if people already using Matomo are hosting it on premises. I think it's free, or using Matomo Cloud. I think it's not free. Do we have any Matomo expertise to respond to that?
I believe Matomo Cloud starts at $29 a month, which I believe is for 50,000 page views. I may be wrong on the number of page views, but they charge based on how much usage you're getting, or you can host it yourself for free, which is what Notch 8 did for the development of this project. It was actually pretty easy to do. And then you can set up as many accounts as you'd like and have as many page views as you like.
Thanks, Sarah. Any other questions coming in? Give it just a few moments. Well, thank you, team, for that presentation. We have a scheduled break. We're running a few minutes early. So I did prepare a stand-up comedy routine, but I think the term Heather used was wildly inappropriate. So we won't be experiencing that today, but we will have a 20-minute break. We will come back at 20 past the hour. That would be 9:20 Pacific, or let me share so you all can see. That is not the right break. There we go. That's the right slide. That'd be 12:20 Eastern. So we'll see you all in about 20 minutes. I'm showing 20 past, but let's give folks a 1-minute grace period. I'll start counting to 60 quietly to myself. All right. Well, let me pass things off to Jessica Hilt, Jose Blanco, Daniel Pierce, Rebecca Cati, and Denanji Mathana. I will stop
I
sharing.
need to share a screen. Oh, there we go. All right. Good morning. I'm a little under the weather, but I'm hoping it comes off as like husky radio announcer and not plague victim. So you'll have to let me know. All right, welcome to the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group story time. I brought some friends with me today, and so I would like them to introduce themselves. Daniel, do you want to start out?
Of course. First on the slide. I'm Daniel Pierce, a developer at Indiana University, and I've been on many of the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group's sprints. I've lost track of how many now, so that many.
I'm Jose Blanco from University of Michigan, and I haven't been in maintenance working group for a while, but I was in it, I think last year for a few months. So yeah, but it's been a while.
I'm Rebecca Cuddy. I'm the Institutional Repository Librarian at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I started on the Maintenance Working Group in January.
Hi, I'm Denanji Mathana. I'm a front-end developer at Indiana University Libraries. I was in one of the maintenance working group sprints back in 2019.
Hi, I'm Julie Hardesty. I'm the Hyrax product owner. I'm the metadata analyst at Indiana University, and I'm kind of sort of here on this panel, but not really, because the people that are doing the work, those are the stories that we really want to hear. So I'm just here to like thumbs up and support and stuff. So I've been on this since October last year.
And I'm Jessica Hilt. I'm going to act as the moderator today, and I don't really know what I do on the maintenance group except for come in and cheerlead. So I'm okay with that. The people are great. All right, so the way that we're going to run this panel is I'm just going to put up some questions and I'm going to ask the panel to answer them. And then if people get quiet, I will call on people because I'm mean and I love it. So why don't we start with, how did you get involved with the Hyrax maintenance group? Were you voluntold? Is this something you were interested in? How did you hear about it? Yeah, who would like to start us out? Go ahead, Jose.
Okay. I did not volunteer willingly, but I did enjoy it. No, I was told by University of Michigan we had committed time, and that's how I got involved in it. And I had worked on the collections extension working group for a while, so I had a little experience how it would go. So yeah.
I'll go next. Yeah, when I joined back in 2018, I was working in the Avalon team as a front-end developer, and I was solely working on one of the React components that we were building then, and I was not working on the Avalon side of things. And when this was announced, my manager, Maria, she asked me whether I would like to get involved, because I had not had any interaction with the community by that time, even though I was working for like 6 months. So that's how I got involved. Yeah, I did not volunteer, but I did enjoy working with the people there. Yeah.
I can go next. I actually did volunteer. I saw the call for participation on the community list, and I had been involved in some of the release testing for Hyrax. So I thought, hey, I can QA testing. I can do that. I wanted to be more involved in the community. For myself, I've been transitioning into a product owner role for a Hyrax-based institutional repository. So I wanted to contribute back to the community and make sure that UNC contributed back to the community since we had participated in QA testing in the past. I wanted to keep that up. And so I figured I could make a contribution, and they all said yes.
Rebecca's glutton for punishment.
I am. I really am.
Why don't we move to the next question? What are some examples of the type of work you do in this group? So if somebody is thinking like, hey, I have heard of the Hyrax maintenance group, but I'm not sure that I am qualified, or I don't know what type of work that they do. Why don't we talk about a little bit of what we tackle in the group?
I can go for this one. Mainly we do whatever the product owner says or the tech lead says. But whoa, hello, lots of slides. Magic mouse, I'm thinking.
It is. It's the worst. I hate the magic mouse more than anything in life.
Really, there's just various little issues that come up. We maintain a project board on GitHub that gets populated with various things. And there's usually suggestions about what we should look at next, but it's pretty open. I think if anyone sees something that they're wanting to either try to fix or just test to see if it's still a problem or if it needs more documentation, then they're pretty much free to choose something from the list. As a developer,
do you want to give a couple examples of things that you've tackled this year?
Let's see. I was going to finish my point, which was the other big thing that comes up, at least for developers, is doing the pull request reviews, since having someone on hand to look at those right away really speeds up the cycle of work, instead of waiting for someone on Slack or wherever to come by, and then being able to kind of request, hey, I have something I need to look at. Then we try to be standing by for that. I'd say something I've done this year I felt was fairly major was me and Tamsin and Jeremy Friesen as well all spent a good amount of time learning about Kubernetes and trying to spin up the DOSI Hyrax app with Kubernetes. And that all kind of came right before one of our developer congresses, which meant a lot of work of trying to get that going and being ready for other people to come in during the Dev Congress to be able to use it. This is actually going to be one of my answers for a later question, which was what was one of the challenges? And that was that despite our work in that Dev Congress, we still had quite a few people who had difficulty getting Docker up and running to be able to spin up really fast.
Who else would like to chime in with an example of what they've worked on this year, or when they were sprinting?
When I was on it, I would look for bug fixes a lot, and things I could reproduce, issues that were well defined and had a resolution. I really stayed away from issues that required a lot of conversation, because it was also 2 weeks, so you wanted to kind of finish it, So things I was familiar with, maybe from the collections extension. So I just wanted to be able to reproduce the issue. It made sense to me, and then I would go ahead and take it. And it was the working group board. If I didn't see an issue there I liked, I would ask Tamsin if I could tackle another one from just the regular issues list, I think. And so he was okay with that, or it was okay with that. So yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Why don't we take a moment to share a success that happened during the Hyrax maintenance group? I know maintenance does not sound like there are success stories. It sounds a little dry, but I know that y'all have had some really great successes. So Rebecca or Dinanji, do you have a success that maybe comes to mind?
Sure. So kind of going back to Daniel's point about Docker, and we participated in the Dev Congress, is that July, some time ago? What is time anyway? I got Hyrax working in Docker, which was really exciting because I am not a technical developer at all, but getting that up and running was really, really great and kind of affirming that I can do this. And everyone was really, really supportive, which was great and very patient with me.
I think that is something that's really great about the Hyrax maintenance group is a lot of times it's, it's such a supportive environment to either test your chops or to do something that you're not really comfortable doing. You know that nobody is there to like watch you fail. They really want to set you up for success. So, being able to tackle something that you're unfamiliar with is definitely, I think, a really fun part of the Hyrax maintenance group. Who else would like to share a success? No? All right, I'll move to the next one. How about a challenge? I know I already took yours, Daniel, so I'm not going to ask you. But Dinanji or Jose, do you have a challenge that you've tackled and maybe didn't feel great about, but it was just hard and being part of Hyrax maintenance group?
Yeah, I can go for this one. Yeah, there was this one ticket that I picked from the board where there was it was a UI ticket where we needed to handle some forms in the work related pages. So the issue was actually the page reloading and not saving any of the previous changes. So when this was brought on, I tried working on a fix with like JavaScript, and that didn't work. And then I went back to the group and talked with Tamsin. And one of the things that came out, it was actually a challenge because it's at the time it seemed like it's a really big change that we needed to do, just not a fix for that particular issue. So one of the things that came out of the discussions with the team was that we need to go back to designing the whole thing. But then when I stopped working at the group, I did not go back to that. But one of the decisions that we made was we needed to go back to the UX working group and do a redesign. So that's one of the challenges that I faced when I was working in the group. But with the help of the others, specifically Tamsin, with the discussions that we had, we were able to like tackle it, not fully resolve it, but tackle it at the time. So that's one of the things that I remember.
I will say that is one of the things that I find challenging is a lot of times we will pull a ticket that's been sitting in the backlog for quite a while. And then when we start to tackle it, we're like, wait, did we resolve this already? Was this something that was resolved in a previous? And then we have to go back to the originator of the ticket and be like, is this resolved for you? Or is it just like, are we crazy? And that is a little bit challenging. The backlog can be deep and old, but that doesn't mean that we won't try to tackle some of it. So that can be a challenge for sure. Any other challenges before I move on to the next question?
It's been a while since I've been on the group, so I just looked at some of the pull requests I sent, and the one that came to mind was title is an array type, but we wanted to treat it as a single string type in the form, and which seems so trivial. But I remember having to have conversations about it and what happens on this page, and it's blowing up here. So that was one that required more input from different developers, principally Tamsin. But yeah.
Perfect. Excellent. All right. Who was I know I typed these onto the slide, but then I tried to read them and it seemed foreign to me. Who was somewhat new, and what was your perspective working on the Hyrax maintenance group? Who was kind of new to the community and new to working with the community and then jumped into Hyrax maintenance group?
Yeah, that was my first interaction with the community, working in the Hyrax maintenance group. My first impression was, since all the people are remote, like we are not meeting face to face, would that work? But it actually did work. Everyone supported the others. Like when you have issues, first when I started, I was not able to run Hyrax on my local dev environment, and I got a lot of help from others when I started on that. So I think it was a great experience for me to start on that, even though I was not familiar with Hyrax. It was a great how do you call it, introduction to the community for me. So, and also I have not been in person for any of the connects, and yeah, so I've seen all of you online. So that's how it started. But yeah, it was good for me. Yeah.
I would probably lose my mind if I saw you all in person. I mean, I've seen a lot of you in person a few years ago, but I don't know now. Like I'm not sure you actually exist. You only exist in my Zoom. Who else was anybody else kind of new and they jumped into the Hyrax maintenance group? Okay. Then let's go to now longtime members of the community. What was it like joining the Hyrax maintenance group and working with a bunch of people you've seen all the time?
Really seeing all of you people all the time is one of the best things. It really helps stay connected with what's going on, because there's all sorts of little mentions of, oh yeah, we're kind of working on this other project and these things are coming up, and it's kind of just an offhand comment, but it really helps give you an idea of what's actually going on in these other institutions. The other thing that I really like is that we really do try and take in all levels of skill. I mean, I've been doing it for a long time, but I definitely know I'm not the most skilled Hyrax person here. Far from it. But being in this group, that you're able to help out no matter what level of skill you have.
I don't know if I was long time, but maybe sometime. But because I had, it was easy to jump in because of my work at the collections extension group. I knew what to expect, and yeah, I knew what to expect. And I also, I was grateful that eventually at some point you have to make contacts with other developers. So in the extension group, I had tackled issues where I needed input from other developers. So if I got, like I had already in my mind, like if I'm stuck on something on UI and I need some guidance, I'm going to go to Adam Arling. I just text him, Slack him really quickly and say this, and he would point me to some things, and yeah, it usually helped. And so I had my Lorita. I would go for permissions, and so the connections help. You know who to when you get stuck, even just to talk about it helps resolve the problem. So yeah, I think that was my experience. You got to get your feet wet at some point, and once you do, you become better at what you're doing.
Yeah, it's definitely much easier to tackle that code base, having personal contacts with people in the maintenance group, right? Like when you're working on something on your own locally, and you've already worked with people in the community in a maintenance group or an interest group, it's much easier to be like, hey, I'm having trouble with this, can you help me out? It just doesn't seem like it's coming out of nowhere. So it's definitely great for building those relationships. All right, let's move on to the next question. What are your thoughts about participating in the new pledge model with the Hyrax maintenance group? If you don't know about this model, I did put a link in the slides. It is the new pledge drive to pledge hours to Hyrax maintenance. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think about that? You have no thoughts. Okay.
I have thoughts.
Yay, Rebecca.
I think it encourages people to participate. When I first started on the maintenance working group, I couldn't commit to a 2-week sprint. I could only do 1 week out of the 2 weeks. And I was a little concerned, should I even ask if I can be on the group if I can't commit to the full time? So I think this removes the barrier because you can, pledge how much time you have. And I'm for it. I think it's good. So I hope to continue participating. Probably should have mentioned that to my boss before saying it in the community, but
we won't tell.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I know when I do it, when I've been in the maintenance group, there's an understanding that I'm not going to get new work here, in my group. That if something goes down or there's something comes up that wasn't expected, I'm going to have to look at it. So I might have to check out a little bit. But basically, new development and things like that are put on halt, and so I can really just focus on the work at the maintenance group, which I think is really good. Not having to switch so much, So it's a good experience, and you always learn something new and contribute.
Anyone else? Daniel?
Yeah, I think a big benefit of it will be for planning purposes. There is at least once where we got to, I think, the last Friday of one of the big sprint cycles. And we were sitting there in our stand-up and going, so who's doing this next time? And I realized, I don't know. I should probably go ask if I'm doing this again next time. So obviously that's not a lot of lead time to determine that. So knowing that, I think it's a 30-day lead time is on the pledge. I think you'd have to check that. Yeah, having some better ways to plan for who's going to be available, and for not just the maintenance group, but all these other groups that are listed there. That'd be great.
One of the questions we got in Slack was, what other changes might help you to participate in the future or make your time participating easier? I love this question. I think the pledge actually does make it a little bit easier because you can go to your institution and be like, hey, can you pledge my time, and get a commitment from them. I think that's the hardest part, is getting commitments from institutions to do this work. I will say it is one of the benefits also of doing this work, is a lot of times I hear from my institution, like, what is going on with that Hyrax people? And so it's really easy when you participate to be like, well, let me tell you. And I can go through all the things that we've worked on in the Hyrax maintenance group. And, you know, because the strategy for Hyrax is a much larger picture and harder to pin down, right? It's way more ethereal. But to talk about like what the day-to-day work is in Hyrax is really great to be able to bring back to my institution. What would you tell a manager considering whether to contribute valuable time to group maintenance? How should people talk about the value to their local institution? Any ideas? How would you, and maybe how do you approach your manager about this? Daniel, I hear your manager is the worst. So, you know, how do people approach their institution to promise time or to get time to work on Hyrax maintenance?
Well, I've consistently said that having the insight of hearing what other people are working on and, you know, being somewhat forced to really look at some of the deep parts of the stack really gives you some better understanding of what's going on. Yeah, the better connection you have to the community by being part of it. You get to know kind of the timelines of what's going on, what to expect. That's the biggest benefit, I think. And the sense of contributing back.
Well, also,
there's Daniel's boss in Juliet's screen.
I believe that's Whiskey. No, really, that's his name.
Aw. What were you saying, Jose?
I was just going to say, if there are issues that the community wants to take up that are going to affect your local instance of Hyrax, that's a big motivator. You know, that's, you know, we want this functionality, this new functionality, or this enhancement to this functionality. If we're in the working group, it's going to get done fast. You know, we can contribute with that. And that's always, I mean, it's a win-win for everybody.
It's a great point, Jose. Another question from Anna is, how much do developers on this group pair on issues together? It's a great question.
I personally haven't paired with anyone, but I have had conversations, you know, you know, that have gone a conversation, not just one, an ongoing conversation at times. You know, I tried this, whatever, but I haven't really paired. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say not enough. During dev congresses, we definitely pair up a lot more than during these maintenance sprints. So depending on the problem, it can definitely be helpful, especially if we have someone who's a newcomer, then pairing up is always very beneficial then. That said, it's a little difficult at the moment just because the attendance has been somewhat low.
Any other thoughts on pairing?
I am going to jump in here and talk about Rebecca and I paired to do some documentation updates, and it was over with the samvera.github.io site. But yeah, I mean, we totally, we got together on Zoom one day and just worked through the whole thing and did the code updates, and then Rebecca did the pull request, and yeah, it was great. That it worked out. We were able to get the updates through, so that was cool.
Pairing is such a great tool. All right, that is the end of my questions. Do we have any more questions in Slack? You guys have given me some really great questions, so I really appreciate it. I could sing a little song. It could be the question song. Where are the questions? Give me some questions. I want some questions right now. No? All right. I guess torturing people didn't help.
We've got time, so you can sing another
Thanks,
verse
Nora.
if you'd like, Jessica.
If I don't get questions, I get real grumpy. Give me questions right now. I also do this in my own daily stand-up, so it's not just community work that I bless people with my great songs. All right. I think that's it.
I do see a few people typing, but
I think they're typing to mock me.
Singing brings community. There we go.
Aw. Thanks, Jen.
Well, thank you for your panel. I guess we can jump over to our next agenda item, which is working and interest group updates. I don't know if Julie Hardesty is next or if Heather's jumping in. All right, Julie.
I was actually, yeah, I don't know if Heather wants to go first, if she's around.
Yeah, up to you.
Oh, go ahead if you want to, that's fine.
Okay, one sec. All right, folks should be able to see my slides. So I'm giving an update on the Hyrax Development Support and Engagement Working Group, the longest and most specifically named working group. This working group got started in March of this year, and it came out of a number of discussions about issues on the development side, potential communication issues, and just some problems and challenges and barriers that I was hearing about in multiple groups from multiple people. So we put this together to figure out how to better support and engage development work in Hyrax. And I think a lot of information has come out of and will continue to come out of this group that will be relevant to all of our technologies. So our charter, our starting goal for this group was that community members who work on Hyrax development and maintenance have identified several chronic issues that must be addressed to protect both Hyrax community code and those who dedicate their time and energy to maintaining it. So the 4 areas were perception that contributing fixes upstream to Hyrax community code is difficult and time consuming. A lack of support by local institutional leadership for turning local fixes into community code, a large and complex code base that was seeing a decline in contributors, and a history of burnout among our community members who take on technical leadership roles. So the group took this code and started working on deciding what the deliverables would be. So here are the folks who were most consistently engaged in this work. Identifying the deliverables and coming up with solutions. And I want to particularly thank Lynette Rail for her strong dedication to this group and huge help to me in connecting me with others and giving me insight into some of the longer running challenges and the things that were working well. And helping to, define things I didn't understand. She was just an absolute superstar of this group and continues to be as we move forward. So thank you, Lynette. So our first deliverable was a process and schedule for 4 developer congresses to be held at regular intervals every year. One thing that a lot of folks noted was that the Dev Congresses really bring a lot of energy and attention and interaction into the community, and we wanted to make sure that those were held often enough. And we also realized that it would be helpful if we leveraged the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group as part of at least 3 of the Dev Congresses. So our process moving forward is that the 3 Dev Congresses, January, May, and September, would be the week after the first week of the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group. That way, anyone who's new to the community and wanted to join the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group for their first week and learn about things like setting up Docker and sort of getting settled in could join that group. And then the next week would be the Dev Congress, and all the folks in the working group could join in. Any folks who were new to the community would already have had a some time to learn, and it would bring some extra energy to those dev congresses and help new folks to get involved. And then we're also going to keep a fall Congress, hopefully maybe in person again someday, that will be alongside Connect. And our next Congress is November 8th through 12th. And this is a great time, sort of an unconference style way to get some work done, features work, and also maybe maintenance work in any of our technologies. So our second deliverable was an evaluation of current contribution culture, strengths, and weaknesses. So we did this over the course of 3 or 4 different open meetings to discuss challenges and solutions. We sort of focused these meetings on one-time contributions, maintenance work, and features work. And we also talked about the challenges of volunteer leadership in the community. We had a lot of participation from across the community in these meetings. And we came up with a document where we outlined all the challenges, and then we went through it and noted any potential solutions that came out of those groups. And then we talked about it extensively in the working group to think about what we could do that would help to mitigate some of these things, and what were sort of things we couldn't tackle right away, but should keep in mind for the future. Our third deliverable was developing new contributor support practices. So the maintenance pledge process came out of this conversation and some other conversations, really comes at some of these development problems from a few different angles. So we're excited to see how that works going into 2022. We identified a real need for more community managed training and improved onboarding processes. So there's a proposed working group to move that kind of work forward. So you'll see some more from us, I think, in the next year as we work on improving those. And we also got the Hyrax maintenance working group involved with reviewing one-off pull requests. These were pull requests that were maybe being going unnoticed and contributing to frustration for folks who were trying to make small improvements or move their local improvements forward and not having anyone around to review. So we sort of found a way to more systematically address those issues. We have some other ideas that are still in process. So we've talked about formalizing the idea of a code component specialist process in Hyrax. You'll hear about this more in the coming weeks, but we're looking for ways to take folks who may have specialized understanding, not of the entire Hyrax code base, but of specific components of the code. And then Julie would have a list of these folks as resources for reviewing pull requests and for other ways of contributing to leadership in the community. We're looking at a working group for plugin implementation. There was a working group that wasn't able to get to the implementation phase, I think a year or 2 ago. So we're looking back at their work to see what can be moved forward, and just generally talking about several ways, small and large, to expand the pool of contributors and reviewers in the code. And our fourth deliverable is recommendations for practices and actions that require commitment from the institutional leadership level. So we've talked a lot about how to talk about the importance of maintenance work, move that kind of work forward. We'll be presenting on our findings at an upcoming partner meeting. The maintenance pledge drive is part of this as well. And we're also just exploring generally, looking for the challenges and the barriers to moving up local fixes into the code. So it's been a great working group. We're hoping to wrap up by the end of this year and hand off some of the work to other working groups who can go more in depth into things like developer onboarding. That is all from me.
Thank you, Heather. Julie, are you ready to share your updates?
Yes, I think I can. Let me share my screen
Wonderful.
and present. All right, so you can see all of that, I think.
Looks good.
Great, okay. So yeah, hi, my name is Julie Hardesty. I'm a metadata analyst at Indiana University, and I'm the Hyrax product owner. So I'm going to be giving the updates for both the Hyrax maintenance working group and the Hyrax interest group kind of all together here. So first off, I'm going to start with the Hyrax maintenance working group. And this is the charge for that working group. And that is to support the core maintenance and development of Hyrax. And we do this by addressing bugs and other issues in the GitHub backlog. And we review pull requests. And what we do for maintenance work is not a replacement for community-led development efforts or contributions. So we don't tend to get involved in a lot of new feature development, but that doesn't mean we don't work on new feature development. So it's not a focus for what we're doing. So the Hyrax maintenance working group has the following members for this cycle, and the sprint cycle that we're in right now started in July. So it's a little bit different than what we're going to be having next year. We had 2 cycles this year, January to June, and then this July to December. But we've been doing this in 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. So 2-week sprints, and then 2 weeks off, and then another 2-week sprint. Is how we've been doing things all year long, actually. And these folks have been absolutely fantastic to work with, and I'm very thankful for their contributions. And I also have another special thank you again to Tamsin for serving as Hyrax tech lead for so long with the Hyrax maintenance working group, and for being a part of this working group as part of that service as well. That has been invaluable. And I also, at this point in the sprint cycle, we're also getting some participation from Beth Sadler at Princeton University as time allows to work on documentation updates, specifically in the samvera.github.io site. So that is happening as well. So we've got a working group that is pretty steady and has been doing a lot of work. Part of what we wanted to do with this cycle, we talked about this a little bit at Samvera Virtual Connect, is we wanted to try and do more frequent releases and try and make it not such a big reach to do a Hyrax release. And we did that. We've done that a little bit so far in this cycle. So we have had more frequent releases happening. We saw 3.0.2 for Hyrax come out with a variety of bug fixes and dependency updates and some deprecations and other cleanup work. And then we had 3.1.0 that followed onto that, that had enhancements for query optimization, a new rake task for regenerating file derivatives in bulk, and deployment improvements for Docker containers and Helm charts and the DASI internal test app. And then in addition to those 3.x releases, we also had a 2.x release, and that was 2.9.6 that was released. They updated Active Fedora to 12.2. So we've also updated documentation for these releases, both the READMEs and on GitHub. And the samvera.github.io knowledge base site has also been receiving documentation updates related to some of the issues that have been worked on and resolved. So the issue stats, I think I showed this yesterday, so I'm showing it again today for those that didn't see the Hyrax update yesterday, but more issues exist now than what we reported on at Samvera Virtual Connect in the spring. So new things have been reported and new issues have been opened, but the Hyrax maintenance working group, along in combination with community members, have also closed 53 Hyrax issues since May. So there's been a lot of activity just in general. And overall, bugs are still going down, which is a good direction, including bugs for 3.x, the 3.x milestone. Priority issues are also being cleared, and we're chipping away at accessibility concerns and documentation needs. And we also, at this point, still have no blocker issues that are alive. So that's great. With no one in the Hyrax tech lead role at this point, we're continuing through the rest of the cycle that way, which means that our capacity for maintenance work is going to be lower than it has been. through December at least. So, but anyone who is interested is welcome to join for the rest of the cycle. You can check in on the Hyrax-WG channel on Slack. And our next sprint begins on Monday, November 1st. We will have stand up at 1 p.m. Eastern, and the Zoom connection info is pinned in that Hyrax WG channel if you are interested in checking in and seeing what's going on and participating. So I also, again, encourage you to consider a pledge of maintenance hours for 2022 for any Samvera technology work, and that includes Hyrax. So for Hyrax maintenance in 2022 for next year, the working group, I think we're going to be continuing with our sprint schedule that we've been doing of 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. So that's going to continue and stay consistent. But we will be switching up planning to be based on 3 cycles of work for the year. So January through April, May through August, and September through December. So I'll also be considering the pledged hours within those cycles, if that's how the pledges come through for a particular cycle. So who we will have and what we can accomplish with those varying configurations of people. So I'm expecting the maintenance working group to potentially be a little more fluid in terms of who is participating on different sprints or in different cycles. So I'm kind of expecting that, and I think that will actually be a really, really cool way to approach looking at the list of issues that we have in the GitHub backlog and how to tackle those. So the Hyrax maintenance group working group will continue with your pledges. So thank you. So I think I will go ahead and move on to the Hyrax interest group. And the Hyrax interest group is a general interest group within the Samvera community. So anyone that is interested in talking about Hyrax, asking questions about Hyrax, welcome to join these meetings. We meet once a month on the second Wednesday, and these meetings are scheduled for 30 minutes. So we try to keep them brief but focused and informative, and they happen right before the Samvera tech call. So we're trying that out as a way to kind of ease, if it's easier for people to get on this right before the tech call, and then the tech call happens and you can switch over to that if that is what you're wanting to do. Our next meeting is on Wednesday, November 10th at 11:30 a.m. Eastern. And there is a separate Slack channel for the interest group, and it's Hyrax-interest-group. We use that for communicating about meetings and having conversation. So the objectives for the Hyrax interest group are, I think the first off is to serve as a place to learn about Hyrax. So if there are things you're wanting to find out about Hyrax, this is a good place to go. It's also a place to consider the Hyrax roadmap. And that's something that I have not been as effective at facilitating, but I've got a little bit more on that in a second here. It also this interest group serves as the home for the Hyrax maintenance working group. So we provide updates. The working group provides updates to the interest group every time it meets about how things are progressing with the working group. So that's also a way to kind of stay in touch with what's happening with the maintenance working group. So what's happened recently since Samvera Virtual Connect in the spring, actually, I think is when we learned that Tamsin was stepping down as Hyrax tech lead, we did work on a description of that Hyrax tech lead position and tried to consider how it might be adjusted to fit the experience and interest of folks in the community who want to be engaged, but don't necessarily have multiple years to dedicate or an all-encompassing mind map of the inner workings of this particular Rails engine. So working on this description, we wanted to consider how the current work of the tech lead could be more distributed in the community. And then this is something from the Hyrax development support and engagement working group. We talked a lot about the concepts that were brought up there, like this idea of a code component specialist who like having a list of folks that we could look to help with pull request review for different areas of the code, that sort of thing. And also how a tech lead role could be focused on a person's area of expertise and how we can welcome that in. So if someone has a lot of experience with deployments or is really well versed in JavaScript or Ruby programming, how could the Hyrax tech lead position fit so that someone with that type of focus would be able to fill the Hyrax tech lead role? So we did a lot of conversations around that, and we do have this position description that may or may not be something we would try to bring about if the Hyrax tech lead role is a particular role that we want to try to fill again. So that's kind of still in the works, but we're still discussing that. We also reviewed the used design principles that were presented by Carla Arton from the Samvera User Experience Interest Group. So it was really great to have the opportunity to see the draft of that and give feedback on the Hyrax perspective of those used design principles. That was very helpful. And then we also reviewed plans for the Samvera Community Vocabulary Manager, which may not be something you've actually really heard all that much about. So it's been something that's been in the works for a while to support metadata property needs for Samvera technology. We know we have some properties that are kind of internal and hanging out there, and there's not really a place where they live in the world. And trying to provide a vocabulary manager where things like those properties could be hosted if we wanted to do that. There's also been some discussion a little bit about controlled vocabularies and that sort of thing, if there are things like that to host for Samvera community needs. So that was something that was discussed. And then so moving forward, I do want to engage more with roadmap work for Hyrax with the interest group. So I think this is going to be necessary to identify our priorities for Hyrax and figure out how to use the pledged hours most effectively. And I want to send a thanks out to Rachel Lynn and Norm Orsted from DCE for your talk on Monday about using Miro for story mapping. I think that is potentially going to be a really, really useful way to approach this, to do an asynchronous activity for story mapping to help identify priorities within the Hyrax interest group, and maybe looking at the list of issues that we have hanging out and what should the priorities be. So I think there's some interesting things there. So like I said, this will help us plan work based on the pledged maintenance hours that are portioned to Hyrax. So we'll see how all the pledges lay out in terms of the different Samvera technologies. And I think that we can also use the Hyrax interest group if we have a hex sticker design that needs some decisions or approvals. So if you would like to be involved in the Hyrax maintenance working group special edition hex sticker design work, there might be some review work that will be happening in some upcoming Hyrax interest groups. So just a little enticement if you're interested in that. So thank you. Those are the updates that I have for the Hyrax maintenance working group and the Hyrax interest group. So thank you for your time today, and let me know if you have any questions or comments.
Thanks, Julie. And we are running early for our break time. So she invited questions, and if there are any, send them forward. Those who wish to, though, we are early for our break, like I said, so we have about 18 minutes before the next presentation. So feel free to come back at 1/2 the hour. And look forward to hearing about bulk racks for import and export and Fedora 6. See you at 1:30 Eastern. welcome back. I'll give it just one more minute to let folks rejoin, making their coffee, etc. And then we'll hear from Rob Kaufman in just a moment. All right, put down the puppies and the cats. I'm going to pass off and welcome Rob Kaufman, and you should be able to screen share, Rob.
Away we go. Of course, Zoom just rearranged all of my windows, so that's always a thing. Can you all see okay? Looks
good.
Awesome. So this talk is titled Bulk Racks, Getting Data in and Out of Repositories. Notch 8 has been doing a lot of work on the Bulk Racks engine, which is a method that we put together, having learned a lot about taking and sort of transforming, often manually edited data from various sources and trying to bring them into repositories. I'm Rob Kaufman, founding partner at Notch 8. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. So what is Bulk Racks? It's an engine in Semvera Labs. It's battery included importer and exporter for Semvera applications. It's designed to be extensible. It's Hyrax focused, but is flexible. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And it provides a full admin interface for imports and exports. Our goal isn't to necessarily, we're not foolish enough to assume that we can get all of the possible data formats that you're going to want to bring in or out of a repository. But by providing a sort of standardized interface for them, then you can spend your focus, or any development focus can be spent on understanding and parsing the format, and not spent trying to do error tracking or retries, or sort of the boilerplatey parts that are all the same between all of these import and exports. I will say that the Bulk Racks code genesis was from the import in Haiku. And so you'll see that there are a few parts that remain even from that as we go through this. Bulk Racks supports full round tripping, so you can, for example, import a CSV, export that CSV, edit it, re-import the CSV. It supports CSV, RDF, Baggett, which then contains either CSVs or RDFs at the moment. An OAI import. Export for OAI is handled already very elegantly by the Blacklight OAI gem, so we don't do OAI export at the moment. Various XML formats, including Fox XML, METs, and mods, and JSON, which is something that we're actively working on. I think it's gonna be really easy. Bulk Racks takes a layered approach to extensibility, and this really stems from my experiences doing importers from various flavors throughout my career. I actually did a Rails Conf talk in 2007 about taking user data and trying to clean it up for import. So I've built a lot of importers, and the thing about separations of concerns is the hard part is always about getting the right separations, like getting the layers right. And in my experience so far over the last couple of years with Bulk Racks, I feel like we've really started to zero in on what those layers should be. So here's our parfait. We're going to parse the file, and then we're going to prep the data, and then we're going to connect it to the data model. And by doing these things separately, you'll see that we get a lot more options for extensibility, and also it means that there's room for error checking. One of the things that's true about any externally imported source, no matter how clean and pristine people promise you the data is going to be, there are going to be variances, right? If someone gives you 20,000 records that they swear is perfect, at least 5 of them are going to be missing their title and not going to be able to be imported, right? Like it's just inevitably there are issues with imported data. And so we want to have opportunities to figure out what's going on during the import. If we're importing from external file sources, those external file sources are going to go down sometimes. And when that happens, like we want to be able to recover from that in a graceful way. So the first part, the parsing piece, is handled by a parser class and an entry class. And I wanted this talk to be really deep. There are a lot of overview talks on like how BulkRax works from a UI perspective as a user. So I wanted to kind of get into the nitty gritty and sort of acknowledge that many of these things will be customized by people trying to use this software. So the parser class reads the incoming data stream, AKA the file, or maybe it's a URL, and is in charge of extracting individual records from that file. So for example, if we get a CSV file, which is essentially an Excel spreadsheet, the parser is going to know how to take each row and split those up into individual parts. The parser might parse a file that only has one record in it. A lot of times you'll get like an XML file or maybe even a bag RDF file that only has a single record in it at a time. An example is this is the OAI parser, uses the OAI gem to read from the OAI field and converts each individual record into a hash. The CSV parser reads a CSV file using Ruby's CSV library and converts each individual row into a hash, as with the keys being the column headers. The Baget parser is in charge of unzipping the bag and reading either the CSV file or the RDF file, and ultimately sends out each record of metadata as a hash. It also attaches the file paths from the bag. The entry class is in charge of each individual record. It's created with sort of the minimum hash of the raw data. I'm gonna go back a step. So by saving these in active record, that gives us a really good point to background them. It lets us sort of make them more repeatable and more debuggable. And it also gives us this sort of source record of what came in, right? Like the record of authority will obviously be the saved curation concern or work object, but this allows us to sort of have a record of sort of the path of the data coming into the system. And we found these entries to be extremely useful at things like, oh, this record's metadata got messed up. Can you restore it from the import? Yeah, we can just restore that one entry and not have to re-import the whole file. Or there was a temporary issue during last night's upload where all the files that were supposed to be downloaded 404 for 2 hours. Can we, fix just those entries? So it's a really useful point to have. Entry.build will convert the raw metadata into the parsed metadata. So it takes and works through our mapping, which we'll see in a few minutes, to sort of take whatever we're bringing in from this individual file and get it into a format that the object factory can then pass off to actually create the objects. I missed this in my previous slide, but the parser class is just a plain old Ruby object. So it is a class that's in charge of, or an instance that's in charge of handling that parser file and isn't saved anymore. Next, we're going to talk about matchers. I'm also going way too fast, so I'm going to try and slow down a little bit. This is the matcher configuration for a fairly complex CSV import. And this would be in our config initializers BulkRax file. So the parser hash or the field mapping hash here, we might see that, so access control ID, this might be present in the CSV, but we're going to exclude it. We're going to ignore it. In the CSV, the header is additional information, and we want to map that in our metadata schema to add info. So that's what this from and to piece here is. Another interesting one is this alternate identifier. Alternate identifier is a compound object in the stored system. And so we map alternate identifier as identifier as alternate identifier inside of an object called alternate identifier. So it's kind of alternate identifier, which is not ideal, but that's the metadata schema that we have for this one particular application. And then each alternate identifier also has a type. And so the field in the CSV is alternate identifier type that gets mapped into alternate identifier type, which again, is silly, but that's how it works in the system. In the metadata schema that we have to start with. The book title is normal. Another really important one is the source identifier. I highly recommend when you're importing and exporting data, if at all possible, to use an external identifier, not the system's generated identifier. The reason for this is if I re-import the same data, so let's say I have records showing up in the CSV, I import them, maybe I export them later, maybe I re-import the original CSV because I messed something up. Like, it allows the records to be easily identified and updated as opposed to creating new records. It's not always possible, and BulkRx will supply a source identifier for you. It'll fill that field in during an initial import if necessary. So I think that kind of gives us some flexibility, but if we can have an external identifier, it makes round tripping a whole lot easier. And it means that you're not going to your metadata uploaders and saying, hey, you have to be super careful not to put records in twice or you'll get duplicates. And then there's another example here of this sort of compound object. So contributor is a child object of the work in the system, and it ends up getting a family name, a given name, a grid, an ISNI, name type, and an ORCID. And those things all come in. BulkRx knows how to parse those so that what it brings to the system is contributor attributes with those values. Any given field has a from, which we just looked at, and the to, which is the sort of the key in that hash. And the from is the field in the source data. So it's the column title in the CSV. It's the XML tag name in an XML parser. And then it has a single destination in the model. So we can have multiple froms leading into a single to. I think I had an example of that. Did I trim it out here accidentally? Yeah, I trimmed it out. This particular one that I was drawing from, there are several places where British English wants an S and American English wants a Z, and we support both in this import. So, you know, the field names might be different. They might be wildly different. So you can have multiple froms that all go to a single destination. The fields can be gathered up in an object, and I just showed this sort of example of a user. You know, they would come in as user with family name, given name, and ORCID. And we talked about the source identifier, the sort of being an outside the system piece and an inside the system piece. So the source identifier is both a single concept and it kind of also has two sides to it, right? Like there's the source identifier name and the work identifier name, depending on whether we're talking about what might be in the external data versus what's in our internal data model. During this processing piece where we're taking the raw metadata and converting it to the parse metadata, we might call a parse field method. So if there's a parse resource, so if resource type is found, it'll know, it can be denoted in our configuration that that's a parsed field, in which case it'll look for a parse resource type method. This one specifically looks up a resource label and says, hey, if it's not one that's in our control vocabulary, then blank it in the import. So don't write non-valid resource type labels to the system. You can do, I have them for URLs that like clean up all the different kinds of URLs. We had a large import where all of the remote files were HTTP, but the upstream had changed to be HTTPS only. So we like fixed that during import with the parse method. The field might be split. So we might have a single title field where we have up to 4 or 5 titles that are just delineated by a pipe character, or sometimes it's a semicolon. There are a lot of different options of what that character that splits things could be. And so you can customize that. And then often there are times where you expect semicolons, for example, in a description, you wouldn't want to split on the semicolon there, because then you would just have multiple descriptions split, you know, kind of willy-nilly based on, you know, actual legitimate English use of the semicolon. It may be implied. So for example, a CSV import if the name of the column header matches a name in your of a property in your system, you don't have to specify. So if it's just title goes to title, you don't have to specify that in this grid. So if they're like really straightforward, they don't have to be specified. You can skip those. I did have an example. So alt title can come from alternative title, alt title, or extra title. Now we've got our parse metadata. It's saved in our database. And we're going to send that off to the object factory. The object factory is the piece that actually connects to the sort of overarching application. So the Bulkrax ships with an object factory that connects to Hyrax. And the goal of it is to take the parse metadata and make it as much like a form post as possible. So for example, you might have collection ID as the field that you import, and that's what comes through your parse metadata, but you really want to set members of collection attributes as a hash that contains an ID in order to, when you save that record, get the collection attached. So you're sort of making it as much like if you went to the web form and hit submit as possible. And the reason for that step is that that allows us to not be in charge of actually writing your object to the database. Like this application or Bulkrax shouldn't care whether what actors you have in your line. It shouldn't matter sort of what pre-processing steps. What are your before save triggers? What are your after save triggers? Like all of that should be handled by your application, and Bulkrax should just do what your form does. And this means the data leaving the object, yeah, we want it to follow that same path as much as possible. And that's the job of the object factory. Bulkrax's default object factory assumes a Hyrax-like process. It creates an environment object and passes in an address hash to it. It knows whether to trigger a create or an update, because those are two different paths in Hyrax. It makes sure that files, associations, etc., are as much like the web form as possible. In the Hyrax example, it then hands everything over to the actor stack, which is the same thing the controller does when you submit a new work. And then kind of lets it go free from there to process. Making a different kind of object factory would be a pretty straightforward process. So having one that saves to active record or to Valkyrie, it's just this one object factory class that would need to be modified to support that. So that is part of what I said about it being kind of Hyrax dependent but flexible. There's a couple of controllers and views that assume sort of Hyrax basic styling that might be modified if you weren't using Bootstrap, for example. But otherwise, things are, the object factory is really the thing that would have to be changed. All of the parsing logic, all of the entry stuff, that's all transferable to other systems. So what kinds of things could we override? We can customize the field mapping. So we saw that that's a configuration file at the moment. And I'll talk a little bit more about the field mapping and why it's written the way it is in my next slide. But it gives us a really good place to just, if we're just using a CSV parser or an existing XML parser, then we might want to change our mapping a little bit to match our metadata schema. And that can be done without any with just that one hash being changed. We can, there's this, every entry calls add local as a method towards the end of the entry process. And so that allows you to override this one concern and get control over your entries. So for example, if what is normally remote files in your system is somehow called special remote files, you could change the hash there at the very end as the last step. Or if you have a complex compound field that needs to draw from other places, you could take the raw metadata hash and process it to get all the different parts, look up whatever you need to look up in the system, and then save that to the parsed metadata hash. If that's not enough, then you can and you can add your own parsed fields. So for example, if when in my URL processing example where we had to put the S on all the HTTP links, like that's not something that's generally applicable. It was useful in this one moment in time. Like it's not the default case. So we added our own matcher for that. And then there's the custom parser. So we can inherit from one of Bulkrax's parsers. There's an application parser, which is the base class, and then obviously CSV, XML, etc. Child classes, you could inherit and create your own parser. And then you can add these to the UI through a configuration in the Bulkrax initializer. So there's a spot when you default install this that'll show you the pattern for adding your own parser. The custom entries, overriding the entry class on the parser. This one method would get you whatever entry class you want to use. These are active record objects. They're inheritable. You can add concerns to them. They're extensible in kind of all the Rails-y Ruby ways. And then you can override the object factory by changing the entry class's object factory class method. You could say, Valkyrie factory or active record factory or whatever, class you wanted to add to your application. So you can see here, there's lots of points to sort of pull things into your app and make adjustments. So let's talk about where Bulkrax is going next. So some of the future enhancements we're working on right this minute is better control over updates with remote files. So a very recent addition to Bulkrax is if you update an imported record and you add and you put new files on it that have the exact same file signature, you're going to get an updated version of that file. Previously, it would, you either had to leave existing files alone and skip them, or remove all the existing files and then add the files again. And now you have the option that it will do a proper version update of that file during the update process. We're working on applying the same thing to remote files. Remote files are a little trickier. You have to download them every time. So that means it's kind of slow, but ultimately we can still say, hey, this is the file name. This is the file name in the file set, original file name from the file set. Do they match? Are they different? Okay, upload it again. We're working on improved relationship support. So basically saying this work belongs to that work. That's in super active development right now. There's some preliminary support for it right now, but it's not very robust and it only goes one direction. I believe it assumes that all parents know about their children, and now we're looking to support the children knowing about the parent. I could have that 100% reversed, but the idea is that in your initial data, the relationship knowledge might go either way, and so we want to support both. And then also adding metadata to collections and file sets at time of upload. So in your import, being able to say, okay, here's the metadata for this work. It'll have these files attached to it, and this file set will have this additional metadata. We're continuing to add additional parsers for new data types. As adoption has grown, we've definitely seen sort of an explosion of parsers that are very specific for given institutions, but many of them also have like more generally applicable concepts. So we're trying to get some of those contributed back to Bulkrax so that it kind of comes with more examples and more options. And I'd like to get the gem promoted out of labs. It has the CI stuff taken care of. It has the test coverage, I think, is where it needs to be at this point. It's being used by way more than 3 institutions in the wild. So I'd like to sort of start that conversation and get that done. I'd hope to do it before Connect, but I'm probably not the only one who got a little busy in the run up to the conference. So we'll try and get that done, in the next month or so. And then another thing that's in progress is the ability to rerun a specific entry from the UI. So I might go in and say, well, 200 of my things succeeded. These 2 failed. I just want to run them again and see if they run this time. Or the dev said they pushed an update last week. I'm going to run these 2 and see if they're working. I don't want to run the whole set because it takes a bunch of time. So I'll just rerun these 2. And if they go green, then I'll rerun the whole set. So it's a nice, UI ability to rerun a specific entry. And then the last kind of big thing in the horizon for Bulkrax is the field mapping UI. One of the reasons the field mapping is kept as a hash the way it is that we did some thought work around and some design work around possibly creating a user interface for the field mapping. The way that would work is you would go in and create your importer just like you do today, And then when you hit submit, it would read your file. I'm going to go specific on a CSV example just because it's easy to conceptualize. And it would look at the headers and maybe give you the first 5 rows of that file. And then you would be able to say in a React or Vue-based interface, okay, title goes to title, alternative title goes to alt title. This one needs to go to a parser. This one needs to go to be split with this control character. You could basically do all of that on an import basis. A big advantage of that, obviously, is it makes the whole thing way more self-serve, and it means that you can individualize and say this CSV file has these mappings, and this other CSV has these other mappings. In order to do that successfully, there's quite a bit of UI work to do and some significant JavaScript to make it user-friendly. But that's something I'd really like to see get into BulkRax, and all of the infrastructure is there to support that. As long as what it produces at the end of the day is a JSON or Ruby hash representation of that the initializer's mapping, it can be saved in the record and processed forward from there. All right, that's my presentation. I would be more than happy to take questions. Looks like I have a few minutes remaining.
We've got a few questions, Rob. I'll just read them out. What does the arc_ID stand for regarding the source identifier?
So this is a thing about this particular source data. The records coming in all have an arc ID from an existing external system. And so we're mapping that in to a metadata field called ArcID, but they're guaranteed unique across all of the records for this particular implementation. And so we're using that as sort of this external source. It's set as the source identifier because that is BulkRax will fall back on using the internally generated ID if it doesn't have another source of uniqueness. But again, for the I accidentally uploaded a record I had previously uploaded case, it's really nice to have an external unique identifier.
Another question we had was, how can an enterprising team who are prospective BulkRax users become involved in development and planning for the gem?
So BulkRax is in the Samvera Labs repository. I can't tell you how proud I was to start seeing external folks, maybe people I didn't even know, adding PRs and opening issues. That makes me feel really good about this thing that we put together and put a lot of work into. So it's definitely expanded outside of the Nachi team itself. As far as roadmap planning goes, there hasn't been a lot of that yet, but I'm really open to conversations. Just reach out to me in Slack or via email, and I'd be more than happy to chat about that. If we get a big enough sort of audience for it, we'll probably start an interest group for it.
Thanks. We also have, how does it work with cloud files like AWS S3 files?
So BulkRax supports remote files, and right now it supports them by downloading them, right? So if you had S3 URLs in your work, then it would be able to pull those in. The other way to attach cloud files is it does support browse everything. So when, for example, you do a CSV upload, you can put in the CSV file, and then there's 3 selectors. You can choose a local path on the server to where the files might be located. You can put a upload of a zip file that contains all the files, or you can open the Browse Everything window and select those files from an S3 bucket or Dropbox or Google Drive or all of the places that Browse Everything supports. And it's able to then, it pulls those down locally and attaches them properly to the works as it processes those records.
All right, those were all the questions that I saw, and we're just about time for our next presentation. So thank you so much, Rob.
Thanks, everybody.
Next, we have Daniel Bernstein and Aaron Griffith. And one of you should be able to screen share.
Awesome. Yeah, that's going to be me. Perfect. We good to go? Can we all see that?
Looks good to me.
All right, awesome. All right, hey, Danny. So, hi, everybody. So welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name's Erin Griffith, and I'm the program coordinator here at Fedora. And today I'm joined by Daniel Bernstein, who's our tech lead. So we're happy to be here to talk to you about the newest version of Fedora, Fedora 6, what you can expect to find in this version of the software, as well as what we have planned for the future post-release. So just to give you an idea of how we made it to 6, here's a brief little timeline of our release schedule. So Fedora 6 was actually started in motion just a little over 2 years ago by the coming together of community members who were looking to improve upon some pain points associated with Fedora 4 and 5, and really wanting to put an emphasis back on our digital preservation roots. So we're actually very fortunate that we were able to sustain momentum toward 6 all throughout COVID and all the quarantines and lockdowns and everything that came with it. We released our alpha version back in December of 2020 and put it into the hands of the community to test and give us feedback. From that process, we were able to move to a beta release at the beginning of 2021 in February, which was essentially feature complete at the time. So this really gave our users and the testers the ability to really kick the tires on the software with all of the bells and whistles attached. They were able to run some test migrations, give us feedback, and we got the feedback that we needed to be able to move ahead with our full production release, which we were able to do by the end of June 2021. So currently we're prepping for the next release of our software and looking to optimize performance with this release. So since June, we've also had the chance to add a few additional items and things which Danny's going to talk about in a few minutes. But why 6.0 and what makes it better than past versions? So first and foremost, Fedora 6 gives users enhanced digital preservation and support. So it's a robust and well-functioning piece of software with a persistence layer that's based on the Oxford Common File Layout, or OCFL, which provides the standard for all the content that's contained within it. So far, it's functioning well based on all the feedback we've been hearing and getting, which is exactly what we wanted it to do. And as I said, those who are testing currently have indicated that it's performing as expected under most conditions. And if it's not, we're able to dig in and find out exactly what is going on, thanks to the performance tracking that we have access to, which we didn't have in past versions of the software. So this has been a really great tool for us in optimization, allowing us insight that we'd never had before into bottlenecks or areas of decreased performance. So we can really dig in there and find out what's going on pretty quickly. And lastly, with minimal changes to the API from Fedora 5, and thanks to the OCFL standard, we should be able to expect that migrations should be easier and maybe even fewer of them required in the future, which is always a win for everybody. So with that, I'm going to actually pass it over to Danny now, who's going to go over what we think or we consider our top 5 features of Fedora 6.
Great. Thanks, Erin. So let's see, we can just run down the list here and then I'll drill down on each one. So we have the Oxford Common File Layout, as Erin mentioned. We have robust migration tooling. So we have pathways now from all previous versions of Fedora, starting from Fedora 3 through Fedora 5. We have a new metrics dashboard, which I can show you some screenshots of. We have a simple search facility. So this is essentially gives you a way to, via the API, to search for on different fields. And we also can say that there are virtually no API changes between Fedora 5 and Fedora 6. So even though the move from 5 to 6 is actually a massive amount of change in terms of the internals, as far as the API is concerned, the HTTP API, it's very, very minimal, which has been great. So moving sort of down that list, and I can drill down a bit. So for those of you who aren't familiar with OCFL, it's a simple, non-proprietary specified open standards approach to the layout of preservation persistence. So this was essentially grew out of the community. There were a lot of people who were having this issue, wanting a standard file layout for repositories. And it really solved a problem for us with Fedora because we were using ModeShape, which is a project, a JCR Java content repository, which didn't, which had the opposite. It had completely opaque file storage, and some of the data was in the database, some of it was on disk. It was all very ModeShape specific. So OCFL gives us a lot of advantages, and so just to run through them, there's the completeness dimension, which is that all the data, sort of all the state of your application, at least as far as Fedora is concerned, is stored in OCFL. So you can blow away any indexes, you can rebuild without any fear of losing data, losing information. It's parsable, so you can read it with just a regular file browser, file reader. Of course, if you have binary assets, those are going to be whatever you've saved them as. But as far as all the metadata and the layout of the data store, it's completely transparent, human readable, and it's machine readable insofar as that it's quite easy if you needed to, although we have Fedora right now, but maybe in the distant future there'll be no Fedora, but you'll still have your OCFL, which is going to be easy to read. And so you could then create a new application that could read and write to that OCFL. It has strong fixity, so robust against errors. So that fixity is at the binary level, the resource metadata level, and as well as the sort of object inventory level, which is sort of like the, you could think of that as the metadata. So the metadata around the actual storage itself. It has versioning, so forward delta versioning, so it's quite compact. And we are supporting S3 out of the gate. Of course, you can use any kind of file system. So EFS is an option if you want cloud, but you're not using S3. And I imagine we will, as folks want it, we will be rolling out for different, sorry, I just lost my place here. We'll be rolling it out for different cloud providers. As far as the migration tooling goes, I mentioned that we have migration paths from 3, 4, and 5 to 6. And this was funded by the Fedora Migration Paths and Tools grant that we received from IMLS. That has been quite successful, and we are greatly indebted to the community for all the work that went into that to test the migrations and pilot migrations and whatnot. The metrics dashboard is a great feature that we were able to bring in to Fedora 6. We're using Micrometer, which is the Java package for instrumenting the code, and then we have Prometheus is the metrics gathering tool, and then we're using Grafana to visualize that. So for really just the price of instrumenting the code, we got this whole other view into the system, and we're using these standard tools, and they're very, very powerful. We went through multiple rounds after our beta of performance improvements, really thanks to these tools. Simple search gives you search by MIME type, created and modified dates, resource type, content size, by ID. So it's not intended to be a replacement for Solr or Elastic, but if you have just simple needs, you want to get some visibility, do some object counts based on these fields, it's exposed and available and sort of automatic. As far as integrations go, we have the Camel Toolbox, which you may be familiar with. Actually, probably not in the Samvera community, because this is mostly used by folks who are doing a custom integration with Fedora. But it does do Solr indexing. It can index to a triple store. There's a custom HTTP facility that allows you to easily integrate with any HTTP service. Then, of course, it's built into Islandora, so it's an option if you're an Islandora user to just plug Fedora in. It is now compatible with Valkyrie, so to the extent that Sambara is supporting Valkyrie, if Fedora is now supporting that. And finally, we are moving towards Docker in most of our deployments. So everything that you want to do with Fedora is available through Docker Hub at this point. And that's including the Camel Toolbox, which will be released shortly. So migration testing highlights. Islandora was able to upgrade from 5.x with I think maybe 1 or 2 minor code tweaks, which was gratifying. And then we had the Berlin State Library did a migration from, I believe, like 4.5 or 6 up to Fedora 6, and they were successful. If you're interested in that, I would recommend you take a look at this YouTube video, which that was a presentation of that migration experience. As far as coming weeks, future plans, we have a 6.1.0 coming out, which is mostly performance improvements in terms of read-write on OCFL. There's some features and bug fixes, but for the most part, it's performance related, especially if you're working on a NAS. There is some incremental improvement in the S3 connector. We also have our Camel Toolbox release, which should be happening this month as well. And we have, we're planning sort of over the next, say, months, continuing to support folks in their migrations. We have some ideas around adding some analytics support into Fedora, so taking some of the information that's available in the search index and making that more visible, and summarizing that data about your repository. We also have training workshops and overall community engagement that will be our focus to try to help folks make the move if they want to, or at least learn more about Fedora. So with that, I think I will pass it back to you, Erin.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Danny. So, I mean, there's lots to look forward to there. We're pretty excited about where we've come and what we have left to do. So with the last little bit of time here, I just wanted to take some time and let you know a little bit about our community and how we've leveraged our members and our users in the community to really guide the direction of our program. So last spring, we hosted 2 Fedora user group meetings where we invited members of the community to come together. They could share what they've been working on, special projects, things like that, and talk about how Fedora fits into their ecosystems at their institutions. We wanted to kind of see what they were doing with their repositories and really just hear what they had to say about what they were doing. So typically we hold these in person, but obviously due to COVID, they were virtual. So we held 2 separate sessions, one for North American members and one for people outside of North America in order to try to accommodate for time zones. So it was a really fun way for us to connect with a large group of people at once. And like I said, we couldn't meet in person. So, you know, we tried to just keep it engaging and really, really listen to what our users were saying. And we got some really great success stories come out of them in terms of what they were doing for testing and Fedora 6 and migrations in general. We also just wrapped up a series of community information gathering sessions where we openly invited institutions to take part in kind of a forum style session that discussed their institution's successes and challenges and what they had planned for their future in terms of their repository programs. So the goal here wasn't to speak about Fedora specifically, but really talk about their repository programs in general so that we could kind of listen to the information that they were giving us. We want to then compile it and look for themes or areas that we could tackle as a community as we start to look at our strategic planning for post 6.0 release. So this type of community polling or involvement is actually how we came to Fedora 6 and how Fedora 6 was conceptualized through conversations just like the ones we finished wrapping up. So, I mean, we are a community-led open source program. So ultimately, when we're making the strategic decisions and things like that on where the program's headed, we value and we want the input from our community. And lastly, every week we host our open Fedora Tech meeting. So this is open to anybody to attend and come. This has proven to be an invaluable resource to connect with our dedicated teams of committers on things like development progress and what they're working on. So these meetings are for anybody to join. We have a lot of people come that aren't members necessarily, but they're looking for ways that they can help out or get involved in the development of specific areas of interest to them. So you can, there'll be links at the end, but we hold these every Thursday at 11 Eastern, and we definitely would welcome any new faces into that tech meeting. Danny is our host there, so he always likes a good plug for the tech meeting.
Yeah, tech meeting.
So with that, I just want to thank you. That's all we have for in terms of our presentation. I just want to thank you for joining us today. We're really happy to be here and be able to share our recent successes with you. Just another really big shout out to all of our member institutions that we've got shown here. As I mentioned, we're an open source program funded entirely by the contributions of these member institutions. And without their support, we wouldn't be where we are today, and we wouldn't be able to share the success of 6 with you right now. So if you're not already a member, obviously we'd encourage you to consider becoming one so that we can ensure the survival of our digital preservation software, Fedora, and all of the things that are contained within it around the world. So thanks again. Here are our resource slides. The slide deck, I imagine, will be made available, but there's some things here that you can go through. So obviously download Fedora 6.0. There's the links to follow the mission path. You can read more about our testing and performance, or get connected with us by joining Slack, any of our mailing lists. Our Slack channel is actually probably the best way to get a hold of people or get questions answered the fastest. So if you click on the Get Connected link, it'll show you how to get involved on Slack there. So thank you again for having us. We've really appreciated being here. We are happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Daniel and Aaron. I see some interesting conversation in the Connect channel about collaborating on Hyrax and Fedora 6, so be sure to check that out. And one question about how are Prometheus and Grafana deployed out of the box? Is it easy to point Fedora at my existing deploys?
So the way it works is, in order, all you do is you essentially, there's a Java option, a flag that you turn on either in the config file or on the command line. So that's as far as what it takes to start collecting data. And then we have instructions on the wiki for how to set up, basically bring up a Docker Compose setup with the Prometheus aggregator, and then Grafana are running in a Docker Compose. And it's really quite straightforward. You Docker Compose up, and then we have a Fedora dashboard that you can insert or kind of upload to your Grafana, and you're good to go. So, and going forward, we'll probably have just a separate containerized Grafana with our Fedora dashboard preloaded on there. But at the moment, it does require that you upload that. So I would say it takes, going through the instructions, about less than 10 minutes to set it up.
Thanks, Danny. If there are any other questions coming through, we have a couple minutes. Well, I don't. Here we go. Can you repeat what the search index fields were again, please?
It's Fedora, so the Fedora ID, and it has wildcard searching. You can do the created date, modified date, the content size, the MIME type, and the RDF type.
All right, thank you. I don't see any other questions right now, so I want to thank you so much. I will jump back over just with a few reminders. One, there is a social session after this. I need to find the information for it. I think Heather will post the link in Connect Slack, and that will be a randomized conversation. So Rick Johnson's going to be your friendly host to kind of lead that, moderate that conversation. And that'll be starting right after this. I think it's scheduled for past. And otherwise, that concludes our agenda for today. So thank you so much for tuning in and staying tuned in. We've got 2 more days of great programming. So come back tomorrow and we'll see you then. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.